I'll help you rewrite this text with significant changes while preserving the core meaning, emotional impact, and length. Let me create this as an artifact for you. Markdown. The name I go by is Harper Donovan. I've lived through 34 winters, and 7 days ago, my mother couldn't even make the effort to meet me when I touched down. That detail might seem trivial to some, but consider this. I just invested a full decade of my existence overseas, clearing her massive debt of $2 million. There I stood at the passenger pickup zone in Phoenix, gripping the handle of my luggage, observing strangers embracing their loved ones all around me. My cellular device vibrated. No incoming voice call from my mother. No message explaining a delay. Simply a social media alert. Displayed prominently on my timeline was an image showing my mother alongside my younger sibling at a coastal resort. Beverages clutched in their fingers, identical sunglasses perched on their faces, her embrace around my sister as though she represented the sole offspring worth acknowledging. The words beneath struck deeper than any exhaustion from travel. My mother's beloved child. A sensation inside me turned absolutely silent. A decade worth of extended work hours and wire transfers sent homeward to prevent foreclosure suddenly appeared altered in my perception, as if I'd been observing the incorrect narrative this entire duration. I examined the reactions beneath. Affectionate symbols. Such a well-deserved escape. Most adorable pair. Not a single person commenting on that photograph understood who had genuinely financed that excursion. I lifted my cellular device to my ear, contacted my financial institution's overseas helpline, and spoke merely 6 statements. Deactivate each and every payment card bearing her identity. 10 minutes elapsed before my mother's voice came through, trembling with distress, explaining that employees were claiming fraudulent activity and her payment methods had been restricted, pleading with me to resolve the situation. I inhaled deeply and responded, measured and emotionless. What's occurring is precisely what you've earned. If you've experienced exploitation by those sharing your bloodline, you'll want to witness how I ultimately reverse the dynamic. Remain with me through completion to discover precisely how the retribution unfolded. By the moment I stood beyond that terminal, I'd already experienced an entire existence of carrying the burden of responsibility. My upbringing occurred in San Antonio, within the boundaries of Texas. During those earlier years, my mother embodied something different. She prepared my midday meals, attended theatrical performances at my educational institution, and maintained employment as a front desk coordinator at a dental practice. My father operated as an automotive technician who carried the scent of petroleum and roasted beans and consistently repeated the identical phrase upon crossing our threshold. Provided we maintain our unity, everything will work out acceptably. For a period, that proved accurate. The transformation occurred gradually, in the manner most devastating circumstances develop. Initially, my father developed an illness. He transitioned from representing the most powerful individual in my awareness to someone requiring assistance, traversing from the sleeping quarters to the cooking area without pausing to regulate his respiration. Medical invoices consumed whatever minimal reserves my parents had accumulated. The residence that once provided a sense of security began resembling construction on unstable foundation. Following his passing, my mother ceased resembling the woman who previously moved rhythmically in the cooking area during weekend mornings. Then Reno began manifesting in our existence. During my secondary education years, she declared our relocation to the peripheral areas of Reno. She claimed enhanced employment prospects existed there, and that a clean beginning would benefit our entire household. I failed to comprehend that proximity to gambling establishments formed part of her strategy. In Reno, the solar rays felt more intense, and the metropolitan area generated increased noise. Gambling facilities existed everywhere, resembling luminous attractions drawing anyone experiencing even minor desperation. My mother secured employment at a dental facility. According to documentation, it appeared stable. In actuality, her compensation barely registered in the account before departing again to address obligations and whatever new concept she'd developed for advancing financially. Initially, she visited the gambling establishment alongside colleagues from her workplace purely for entertainment. Several hours at the mechanical games, a complimentary beverage, a narrative to share come Monday. The initial occasion she contacted me from the gaming floor. Her vocal tone carried excitement in a manner I hadn't detected since my father remained alive. Harper, I transformed $20 into $800 during a single evening. Can you comprehend that? I recall experiencing this peculiar combination of optimism and discomfort. Perhaps this represented the breakthrough she'd been requesting from the universe. Perhaps we'd ultimately cease struggling financially. That marked the final occasion it resembled fortune. Subsequently, the communications sounded altered. She'd explain how she'd been extraordinarily close to significant winnings and simply required slightly more to recover her position. She commenced utilizing credit instruments and convincing herself she'd satisfy the balances when substantial winnings materialized. Instead, the outstanding amounts expanded. Accumulated interest compounded upon accumulated interest. Penalty charges accumulated. I observed her pursuing the identical fantasy repeatedly. Sacrificing rest, sacrificing body mass, sacrificing any comprehension of reality. By the moment I completed my nursing certification, the residence existed one missed installment from vanishing. I accepted the initial employment opportunity I could locate in a critical care facility back in San Antonio, operating overnight periods. I was 23, and allocating more duration with expiring strangers than with my actual household. Each occasion I contacted home, my mother's voice carried slightly increased desperation. She informed me the housing loan was delinquent, the credit instruments were maximized, debt collection entities were making contact. When she ultimately acknowledged the depth, that she carried hundreds of thousands in outstanding obligations, I experienced my abdomen contract. I performed what the eldest offspring in dysfunctional households consistently perform. I stated, "I'll resolve this." I accepted additional work periods. I ceased allocating funds toward myself. No new garments, no travel experiences, no evening excursions. I transmitted funds monthly, sometimes half my compensation, sometimes beyond. When that proved insufficient, I began examining travel healthcare agreements. A recruitment specialist contacted me regarding a medical facility in Singapore that desperately required experienced critical care specialists. The compensation was nearly double my earnings in Texas, plus accommodation. I could barely process the numerical values. For the initial occasion, eliminating the debt didn't resemble fantasy. It resembled mathematics. If I performed duties there for several years, maintained minimal expenses, and transmitted most homeward, my mother would retain the residence, and we could respire again. When I informed her, she wept, as if I'd just extracted her from a blazing structure. My younger sibling, who remained a teenager then, became enthusiastic, discussing visiting me eventually, and sharing photographs from the opposite side of the planet. I recall standing in the terminal for that initial departure. My entire existence compressed in 2 pieces of luggage, convincing myself this was temporary. 2, perhaps 3 years. Satisfy the debt, stabilize circumstances, return home to a household that was appreciative and ultimately secure. That represented the strategy. The initial year in Singapore nearly destroyed me. The critical care unit was filled with emergencies. 12-hour periods became 14. Evenings blurred into daylight. I learned how to operate on caffeine and adrenaline and the consistent electronic signals of monitoring equipment. When my compensation registered, I'd transfer a substantial portion straight back to my mother. Each occasion I performed this action, she expressed gratitude as if I'd preserved her existence repeatedly. She consistently promised it was nearly concluded, that following this invoice or that loan was settled, she'd be capable of maintaining independence. I desired to believe her so intensely that I disregarded the components that didn't precisely align. The brief excursions she continuously undertook with my sibling, the new communication device my sibling posted digitally, the manner the total debt never appeared to decrease as rapidly as the funds I was transmitting outward. Whenever I questioned why circumstances remained so problematic, my mother possessed an answer prepared. There existed consistently a medical invoice I hadn't learned about, a residential repair that had failed, some new charge from the financial institution. She made the debt resemble a living entity that continued expanding regardless of her actions. Meanwhile, my sibling commenced posting increasingly polished photographs, new footwear, weekends in San Francisco for some occasion, cosmetic treatments for fingernails that probably exceeded what I allocated on food supplies in a week. Then it was images beside swimming pools at vacation properties, hotel chambers with metropolitan views, celebration attire, and small descriptions about performing diligently and enjoying intensely. Each occasion I viewed one of those posts, I constructed a narrative for myself about how she was financing it. Perhaps she maintained part-time employment I wasn't aware of. Perhaps companies were providing her items complimentarily. Social media personalities receive items donated constantly, I reasoned. It was simpler to accept that than to conceive my mother accepting the funds I sacrificed for and pouring it directly back into the identical void that had nearly consumed us. In the infrequent weeks when I wasn't overwhelmed at the medical facility, I'd position myself at my small kitchen surface in Singapore and access a calculation document on my portable computer. I enumerated each transfer I'd executed, each promise my mother had provided me, each approximate number she'd mentioned for how much remained. On documentation, it appeared we should have been approaching the completion point, but the manner she discussed it resembled we'd barely taken a single step. Any time I attempted to request genuine documents, she became protective. She'd express things like, "You no longer trust me following everything I've experienced," or, "I represent your mother. I would never deceive you about something of this nature." The remorse struck me each singular occasion. I'd retreat, close the calculation document, and convince myself to simply maintain my focus and continue performing duties. That became my complete identity. Not Harper the individual, not Harper the healthcare specialist, not Harper with interests or connections, simply Harper the offspring financing everyone else. I didn't comprehend it yet, but that was the initial component of the destruction. The funds caused pain. The restless evenings caused pain. But losing the sensation that I was permitted to experience a life of my own, that was the component that would require the longest duration to repair. The initial genuine fracture manifested on an evening that should have resembled any other. I'd just completed a 12-hour period in the critical care unit, the variety where everything merges together. Alarms and emergency codes and households weeping in corridors. I arrived home, deposited my carrier by the entrance, and accessed my financial application out of routine. The transfer to my mother had processed 2 days earlier. I anticipated the identical sinking sensation I consistently experienced when I viewed my account sustain a reduction. Instead, something else captured my attention. The amount I transmitted was nearly precisely what she'd informed me she required to maintain the housing loan current. But when I examined the activity on the joint account we utilized for installments, I viewed something else. $1,000 at a vacation property in San Francisco, 2 separate charges from a premium dining establishment on the main avenue in Reno, multiple withdrawals at automated banking machines inside gambling facilities. I stared at the display, replaying our recent telephone conversation. She had wept about the financial institution pressuring her, about penalty charges, about losing the residence if we didn't catch up this month. She had never once mentioned an excursion. I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Perhaps the vacation property charge was an error. Perhaps my sibling was reimbursing my mother. Perhaps. The subsequent day, during a rare, inactive moment at the medical professionals station, I mentioned it to Liam. He glanced at my cellular device, frowned for half a second, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Do you possess actual statements for the debts you're satisfying, or simply what your mother informs you? The response made me experience foolishness as soon as I vocalized it. Primarily what she informs me. I could detect how inexperienced it sounded. Liam didn't make me experience inadequate, which somehow made it more difficult. He simply nodded slowly and asked if I desired assistance gathering everything together. That evening, we positioned ourselves at my tiny kitchen surface, my portable computer between us, my abdomen twisted into complications. Liam demonstrated how to access my credit documentation, how to examine open accounts and their balances. I anticipated viewing a couple of credit instruments, perhaps a loan, all under my mother's identity with me only assisting indirectly. Instead, I viewed accounts under my identity that I didn't recognize, retail cards I'd never requested, a line of credit established 3 years prior with an address in Reno, and a telephone number that wasn't mine. I examined silently while my pulse hammered in my auditory organs. "There's no possibility this is accurate," I stated. "I don't even reside there." Liam leaned closer, reading the display. "The Social Security identification is yours, Harper," he stated quietly. "Someone utilized your identity to establish this. You need to contact the financial institution." My initial reaction wasn't anger. It was refusal to accept. There had to be some confusion, some administrative error. I convinced myself perhaps the system automatically filled my information because I was a co-signer on something. I contacted my mother, my hands trembling. "Hey," she responded, excessively cheerful. "How is my Global Explorer?" I didn't engage in preliminary conversation. "Mother, did you establish any accounts in my identity?" There was a moment of silence, a small distortion on the connection. "What are you discussing?" she stated, her vocal tone careful and light. I explained what I was viewing. The accounts, the Reno address, the telephone number. She dismissed it at first, stated credit documentation was never precise, that I was overreacting. When I didn't retreat, her tone transformed. "Why are you accusing me as if I represent some variety of criminal?" she responded sharply. "Following everything I've experienced, following everything I've performed for you." The remorse rushed in immediately. This was our pattern. I ask a reasonable question. She converts it into a personal assault. I conclude apologizing. But this occasion something inside me resisted. "I'm not accusing you," I stated slowly. "I'm questioning because it represents my identity on this debt. If something occurs, they pursue me." She commenced weeping so loudly I had to distance the cellular device from my ear. "You don't comprehend what it resembles here," she sobbed. "I'm drowning, Harper. I've been performing my best. Those accounts are probably simply how the financial institution restructured circumstances. They informed me it was simply documentation. They stated it was the sole method to maintain us afloat." Her statements emerged in a rush. Half explanation, half manipulation. The phrase "us" floated in the atmosphere between us. Us never appeared to include me when happiness existed to be experienced. Us only manifested when she required something. Following the communication, I positioned myself in silence for an extended duration, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment. Liam messaged from his location down the corridor. How did it proceed? I stared at the message, then typed back the simplest falsehood. "Acceptable." She stated the financial institution handled it. For several weeks, I attempted to force the entire situation into a back section of my consciousness. I buried myself in duties. I convinced myself the agreements had a conclusion date. The debt had to be finite. The sacrifice would ultimately pay off. Then my sibling posted a recording that destroyed the refusal to accept completely. It was a compilation of her weekend in San Francisco. Segments of her in a hotel accommodation, performing her cosmetic application in a marble bathroom, spinning around on a balcony with the metropolitan illuminations behind her. At the conclusion, she was touching glasses with my mother at that identical vacation property whose identity I'd viewed on the financial statement. The description stated something like, "Females who work diligently deserve to experience pleasure." I observed it 3 occasions. There was no diligent work. There was me in the critical care unit, maintaining hand contact with patients who wouldn't survive through the evening. Me consuming stale vending machine roasted beans at 3 a.m. Me carrying the burden of my mother's selections, while she toasted my younger sibling for being the cherished one. That evening, I contacted my mother again. For once, I didn't soften my vocal tone or apologize before I even produced the statements. I questioned her straight out if she was utilizing the funds I transmitted. Funds she stated was for debts to finance for excursions and gambling establishment evenings and whatever else she could justify as self-maintenance. She didn't retreat or acknowledge anything. Instead, she went on the assault. "I cannot comprehend you're jealous of your own sibling," she responded sharply. "She's simply attempting to construct a life. Not everything revolves around you transmitting funds, Harper. You think you represent some variety of hero because you perform a job. Numerous people perform jobs. I experienced my jaw tighten. A job. That's what she designated maintaining people's existences in my hands, while she positioned herself in front of a mechanical game. Mother, I transmitted you beyond the average American earns in a year, I stated, my vocal tone trembling even though I didn't desire it to. I possess calculation documents. I possess the numerical values. The debt should nearly be eliminated by now. Why do you still carry so much? Why are you establishing things in my identity? She went silent for half a second, then launched into a breathless discourse about accumulated interest percentages, about how the financial institution deceived her, about concealed charges and how nothing was equitable. And then she went for the old statement, the one she knew landed each occasion. If you cease assisting now, we lose everything. Your sibling will be without shelter. Is that what you desire? Do you desire to view her without housing? Something small and stubborn in me spoke up before the remorse could smother it. She's 26, I stated. She could secure employment. There was a sharp inhalation at the other conclusion, as if I'd stated something obscene. You're cruel, my mother whispered. This funding has transformed you. Singapore has transformed you. You think you're superior to us now. The communication concluded with her terminating on me. I stared at the blank display, my reflection faint in the black glass. For the initial occasion, instead of experiencing like the antagonist for asking questions, I experienced anger. Not wild, uncontrolled anger. A cold, clear variety that made everything sharp around the boundaries. Over the subsequent several months, I attempted to establish boundaries. I reduced the amount I transmitted. I stated I required to satisfy my own educational loans, that I couldn't maintain transmitting the identical amount indefinitely. Each occasion I decreased the number. The drama increased. She'd contact in the middle of my period, leaving voice recordings about debt collection entities pounding on the entrance, about losing the sole thing my father had left us. My sibling would transmit messages questioning if I was upset at her, stating she experienced like I didn't love her anymore. On the rare communications where we were all on the connection, I could detect my mother prompting her in the background, feeding her statements about household and loyalty and sacrifice. Liam observed me experience that roller coaster repeatedly, until ultimately, one evening following a particularly brutal period and an even more brutal telephone communication, he positioned his beverage down and looked me straight in the eye. You comprehend this isn't normal, correct? He stated quietly. Parents are supposed to support their offspring, not treat them like a retirement strategy. I responded sharply at him at first. You don't comprehend it, I stated. She's experienced a lot. She lost my father. She's alone. If I don't assist, who will? He didn't argue. He simply asked one simple question. If you weren't there, what would she perform? The response was obvious, and it made my chest cause pain. She'd figure something out. She'd secure a second job. She'd sell the residence. She'd discuss with a financial consultant. She'd face the disorder she created instead of depositing it on me. Comprehending that didn't magically flip a switch. I didn't sever her the subsequent day. I performed what I'd consistently performed. I attempted to locate a compromise that would cause me the least pain. I convinced myself I'd transmit funds for several more months, simply until she caught up on the most severe of it. I convinced myself my sibling deserved a chance to land on her feet. I convinced myself I could handle slightly more exhaustion. I didn't comprehend it yet, but that decision to provide them one final stretch of unconditional support was precisely what established the final break. Because the more I attempted to maintain to the version of my household I wished I possessed, the more difficult the truth was going to strike when it ultimately manifested in black and white. The breaking point didn't arrive with a dramatic confrontation. It manifested in an envelope like any other piece of correspondence. I arrived home from another extended period, removed my footwear, and noticed a stack of correspondence on my small surface. Most were promotional materials. One possessed my identity printed in bold, with a return address from a financial institution in the United States. I frowned. I didn't possess any active accounts with them, at least not any I recalled establishing. I tore it open, anticipating some marketing proposal. Instead, it was a notice about a past due balance on a line of credit. My line of credit. It listed an address in Reno that I hadn't resided at in over a decade and a telephone number I didn't recognize. The minimum installment due was absurd, and the total balance made my abdomen twist. Before I even completed reading, I experienced that identical cold clarity I'd experienced looking at my siblings' recordings. I grabbed my cellular device and contacted the number on the correspondence. A woman in the collections department accessed the account and commenced reading off details. My full identity, my social security identification, the Reno address, the telephone number. I interrupted and informed her I was contacting from Singapore, that I'd never requested this. There was a pause while she checked the file. According to our records, this was established in person, she stated. Application signed 3 years ago. Do you recognize the cosigner on the mortgage listed here? My heart dropped. She read my mother's full identity. I terminated the cellular device without stating much of anything. For a full minute, I simply stood there in my cooking area, correspondence in one hand, cellular device in the other, experiencing like the floor had shifted under me. Liam walked in with takeout several minutes later. One look at my face, and he positioned the food down without a statement. I handed him the correspondence. He read it twice, then looked up at me. Harper, this is identity theft, he stated quietly. This isn't a misunderstanding. Someone utilized your information. We both comprehended who that someone was. I contacted my mother. She responded on the second signal, sounding distracted and annoyed, as if I'd interrupted something enjoyable. Hey, can I contact you back? I'm about to depart, she stated. Depart where? I questioned. There was music and conversation in the background. Somewhere loud. It doesn't matter, she responded sharply. What's occurring? You sound peculiar. I took a breath. Did you establish a line of credit in my identity 3 years ago? The silence that followed stated more than any statements could have. When she ultimately spoke, her vocal tone was sharp. I cannot comprehend your throwing that in my face. She stated the financial institution representative stated it was simply documentation. They informed me we required another account to consolidate everything. I only performed it so we wouldn't lose the residence. You act like I performed it for enjoyment. I pictured her positioning herself behind some desk at the financial institution, nodding along while a loan officer slid documentation across the surface and her thinking, if I simply write Harper's identity, this entire disorder goes away. Except the disorder never went away. It simply got transferred. Mother, that's not simply documentation, I stated, my vocal tone shaking. That's my existence. That's my credit. If I ever desire to purchase a residence or a vehicle, or even secure a basic loan, they're going to examine this. You didn't even question me. She commenced to weep right on cue. I was desperate. She stated, You weren't here. You don't comprehend how frightening it is when collectors manifest at your entrance. I performed what I had to perform for this household. That phrase again, for this household. It had become a shield she concealed behind whenever I got too close to the truth. This was the initial occasion I didn't permit it to function. I represent part of this household, I stated. You maintain stating you performed it for us, but all I view is you making selections that wreck my future, so you don't have to face your own mistakes. She went quiet. Then she turned malicious. If you had been here, I wouldn't have had to, she stated. You departed to exist your fancy existence overseas and left me to address everything alone. Now you desire to judge me. I stared at the cellular device like it might bite me. My apartment felt very small, the atmosphere heavy. I could experience Liam observing me from across the chamber, attempting to read my expression. I concluded the communication before she could twist the knife any deeper. For the subsequent several days, I moved through the critical care unit like a phantom. I still performed my duties. I still suspended medications and calculated infusions and charted vital signs. But in my consciousness, numbers continued operating on a different loop. The thousands I'd transmitted, the balances that never went down, the debts established in my identity. The truth was simple and unpleasant. My mother hadn't simply taken advantage of my assistance. She'd taken my identity and utilized it like a spare credit instrument. One evening, following a code that didn't conclude well, I positioned myself in the staff lounge, staring at a vending machine sandwich I possessed no appetite for. Liam positioned himself beside me, leaning back in his chair. "I think you require to return home," he stated. "Not to rescue her. To view circumstances for yourself and decide what you desire your existence to resemble." The concept of returning home struck me more difficult than I anticipated. I hadn't been back to Reno in nearly 10 years. Everything I comprehended about my household was filtered through telephone communications and social media. Part of me had maintained it that manner on purpose. Distance made it simpler to accept the narratives my mother informed. But now there was a correspondence on my surface, and an account on my credit documentation that stated distance hadn't protected me at all. It had only made it simpler for her to cross boundaries without having to look me in the eye. I commenced operating the mathematics in my consciousness. I could take a leave from the agreement. I'd saved enough to afford an excursion home and several months without transmitting funds. It would cost me, but not as much as remaining in this limbo indefinitely. When I contacted my mother and informed her I was thinking about returning home for a period, her reaction was immediate and wild. "Are you serious?" she stated, her vocal tones soaring. "Oh my divinity, Harper, that would be amazing. We could ultimately be a household again. Your sibling will be so enthusiastic." She launched into a breathless vision of us having meals around the surface, attending shows on the main avenue, her introducing me to her friends like we were simply another normal household with normal problems. No mention of the correspondence. No mention of the line of credit. No mention of the fact that my reserves and my credit had been utilized like a bandage on a wound she refused to cease reopening. I listened, experiencing both pulled in and repulsed. A part of me still desired that image, the one where I walked out of the terminal into my mother's embrace and everything experienced simple for once. Another part of me comprehended that was never going to occur unless I ceased pretending already. We selected a date together. I reserved the flight as soon as I got off the communication, observing the confirmation correspondence strike my inbox. 10 years of missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed ordinary days were all going to collide into one arrival. In the weeks leading up to the excursion, my mother contacted more than usual. She transmitted me links to residences for sale that she claimed we might be capable of affording eventually if we maintained performing diligently. She discussed redecorating my old chamber, about how we'd remain up late consuming wine and discussing. Her statements painted over the decay, but underneath I could still smell it. My sibling commenced messaging me too, transmitting self-portraits, questioning what garments she should wear to collect me from the terminal. I attempted to respond like nothing was incorrect. But each occasion I viewed a new post of her at some expensive dining establishment or rooftop bar, something inside me clenched. One evening, several days before my flight, I positioned myself down with Liam and laid it all out. The correspondence, the communications, the plane ticket. I informed him my experience like I was walking into a trap I still desired to accept, was an embrace. He listened quietly, then stated the thing I required to detect. "You're not returning home to repair them," he stated. "You're returning home to inform the truth and decide what your boundaries are. If you forget that, they'll decide for you." On the day I departed Singapore, I packed my luggage with garments and gifts I'd purchased over the years but never transmitted. I also packed a folder with printed financial statements, screenshots of my credit documentation, and a copy of that correspondence. Evidence. Not for them, for me. So I couldn't be talked out of what I already comprehended. The flight to Reno experienced longer than usual. I observed films without genuinely viewing them. I stared out the window and thought about my father, about what he'd state if he could view all of this. I attempted to imagine him arranging on his work jacket and informing me the identical thing he consistently had. Provided we maintain our unity, will be acceptable. But maintaining unity had converted into me supporting everyone else up while they climbed higher on my back. When the aircraft ultimately landed and we moved to the gate, my heart was pounding so difficult it made my fingers tingle. I grabbed my carrier from the overhead compartment, moved with the slow crowd through customs and down the escalators, experiencing like I was walking towards some version of my existence I hadn't met yet. My mother had messaged me hours earlier. Be at arrivals. I'll be right there. I pushed through the sliding entrances to the pickup area. The dry Nevada heat slapping me in the face even though it was late. Households clustered with signs. Offspring ran into their parents' embraces. Couples kissed like they were in a film. I stood there, luggage handle in my hand, scanning each vehicle that pulled up. 5 minutes elapsed, then 10, then 15. My cellular device remained stubbornly silent. No missed communications, no new messages, no apology. Traffic is chaotic. I unlocked it, and a notification appeared from social media. I tapped it without thinking. At the top of my timeline was a new post from my mother. She and my sibling were at a vacation property swimming pool lit by soft illuminations, beverages in their hands, laughing at something simply outside the frame. The location tag was a hotel several hours away, nowhere near the terminal. The description was simple. My mother's cherished offspring. Looking at that photograph, standing beyond the terminal with my luggage and my folder of evidence, something inside me ultimately ceased attempting to explain everything away. The narrative shifted in my consciousness, and this occasion I viewed it clearly. The moment the narrative ultimately made sense, it ceased causing pain in the identical manner. Standing there beyond the terminal, staring at that image of my mother and my sibling at the swimming pool, I experienced something inside me go still. Not numb, not confused, simply still. 10 years of narratives and excuses collapsed into one simple fact. I wasn't household. I was financing. I tightened my grip on my luggage handle, looked away from my cellular device, and for the initial occasion in a decade, I performed something purely for myself. I walked back into the terminal, located a quiet section away from the sliding entrances, and accessed the number on the back of my payment card. When the automated system connected me to a human being, my vocal tone sounded calm, nearly detached. "My identity is Harper Donovan," I stated. "I require you to deactivate each payment card and freeze each line of credit connected to my Social Security identification and my mother's identity." The woman at the other conclusion questioned me to verify my information. I provided her everything she required, then informed her about the correspondence, the Reno address, the accounts I'd never established. There was a pause, then a transformation in her tone that I recognized from my own occupation. It was the manner people communicate when they comprehend something serious is occurring. "I'm going to connect you with our fraud department," she stated. "Please remain on the connection." While I waited, I observed households load into vehicles, observed people roll their luggage toward existences that made sense. Mine didn't. Not yet. But for the initial occasion, I could view a version of it that performed. The fraud specialist who collected the communication sounded like she detected 1,000 narratives like mine, and didn't require me to make it prettier. I informed her everything, commencing with the correspondence from the financial institution and operating backward through the years of unexplained debt. I informed her my mother possessed access to my Social Security identification and had signed circumstances without my permission. I informed her I'd been transmitting funds for a decade, accepting I was satisfying old debt, not feeding new lines of credit. She didn't interrupt, simply typed. When I completed, she cleared her throat. "Based on what you're informing me, this qualifies as identity theft and potential fraud," she stated. "Here is what I can perform on my conclusion today." She walked me through it step by step. She could flag the accounts that had been established in my identity, place holds on them, and commence an internal investigation. Because my mother was listed as the primary on some of the joint accounts and cosigner on others, freezing activity on anything touched by my information would also restrict her access. It wouldn't erase the debt, she explained, but it would cease it from expanding while they investigated, and it would trigger a review of how those accounts were established. I listened, agreeing to each step. The part of me that worried about how my mother would react had ultimately gotten quiet. The part that comprehended how consequences functioned positioned itself up straighter. While we were still on the cellular device, the fraud specialist recommended that I contact the 3 major credit bureaus and place a freeze on my credit. She emailed me links and instructions, and I accessed them right there, positioning myself on an uncomfortable plastic chair in the arrivals hall. With several taps on my display, I secured my credit documentation so no one could establish anything new in my identity without proceeding through me. It was a simple process that made me desire to scream when I comprehended how easily I could have performed it years ago. As soon as I terminated with the financial institution, my cellular device commenced buzzing. At first, it was simply notifications from correspondents confirming the fraud alerts and freezes. Then the communications began. My mother's identity lit up my display. I stared at it signal out once, then twice, until the third occasion I responded. Her vocal tone struck me like a wave. "They're stating I committed fraud," she yelled without even stating hello. "My payment card is not functioning. I'm at the checkout and it's declining." "What did you perform?" The noise behind her informed me she was somewhere public, somewhere bright and loud where she was accustomed to swiping a payment card and having it approved without thinking. I maintained my tone flat. "I reported the accounts you established in my identity," I stated. "The financial institution is investigating. They froze everything tied to my social identification." She didn't question if I was acceptable. She didn't question where I was. She didn't question if my flight had landed. She went straight to panic and blame. "How could you perform this to me?" she cried. "Do you possess any concept what you've performed? I cannot satisfy for the chamber. I cannot secure cash. They're stating I might have to communicate to some investigator. You require to contact them back and repair this right now." In the past, that tone would have triggered an automatic response in me. Repair it. Apologize. Transmit more. Sacrifice slightly more of myself to calm her down. This occasion, the sensation that rose in my chest was different. It was a tired variety of anger that experienced nearly like relief. "No," I stated. "I'm not repairing this. You performed this. I'm simply refusing to conceal it up for you anymore." She switched approaches so rapidly it provided me whiplash. She went from furious to pleading in a breath. "Harper, please," she stated, her vocal tone breaking. "You comprehend I didn't intend for it to become this problematic. I simply required assistance. I thought I could win it back. I thought if I could simply get ahead one occasion, I'd satisfy it all off and you'd never even experience it. They're going to take everything. I could lose the residence. I could proceed to incarceration. You cannot perform this to your own mother." I closed my eyes and pictured my father's face, then pictured the correspondence with my identity on it. "You already performed it to your own offspring," I stated quietly. "I'm simply selecting not to be your shield anymore." I terminated before she could state anything else. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't from remorse this occasion. It was from the shock of detecting my own statements and comprehending I intended each one of them. Liam was waiting when I stepped beyond to the pickup zone again, this occasion with no illusion that my household would appear. He'd insisted on traveling in a day early and meeting me at the terminal simply in case. When he viewed my face, he didn't question if I was certain. He simply reached for my luggage and nodded toward the taxi line. "Lodging first," he stated. "Then we address the rest." In the vehicle, I informed him what I'd performed. The communications to the financial institution, the fraud alerts, the manner my mother had reacted. He listened, then smiled in a manner that appeared more proud than happy. "You performed the correct thing," he stated. "You performed it the manner you'd desire your patients to be treated. You informed the truth and permitted the professionals to handle the rest. The lodging we checked into was nothing special. Beige walls, stiff sheets, a view of a parking area. It was perfect. It was neutral territory. It wasn't my mother's residence with its memories and its phantoms and its traps disguised as household meals. I spread my folder out on the small surface, the screenshots, the correspondence, the credit documentation. I took photographs of everything with my cellular device and uploaded them to a secure folder Natalie had established for me when Liam introduced us over video communication a week earlier. When she contacted that evening, I positioned her on speaker. She discussed me through the subsequent steps in the identical manner I'd discussed households through problematic news in the critical care unit. Calm, clear, practical. We'd file an identity theft documentation with the Federal Trade Commission. We'd transmit certified correspondence to each financial institution involved disputing the fraudulent accounts and demanding documentation. We'd notify local law enforcement in Reno so there was an official record. It would be a process measured in months, not days, she warned me. But commencing it now was the sole method to protect myself extended term. And there was one more thing. Because my mother was the one who'd utilized my information, and because she'd benefited financially, any serious investigation could circle back to her. Depending on what the financial institutions and the authorities located, she could be charged with fraud, or at least face serious civil penalties. "Are you prepared for that?" Natalie questioned. Her tone held no judgment, simply the variety of question that separates a moment of anger from an actual decision. I thought about my mother weeping on the cellular device, about the manner she'd shifted into a pattern that had consistently functioned on me before. I thought about my sibling tagging their location at a luxury vacation property while I stood beyond a terminal alone. I thought about all the evenings in the critical care unit when I'd observed people expire younger than my mother, people who'd have provided anything for more duration with their offspring, and hadn't utilized that duration to convert their offspring into human credit connections. "Yes," I stated. "I'm prepared." The subsequent days appeared nothing like the reunion my mother had described. I didn't proceed to the residence. I didn't position myself at her cooking surface, or permit her embrace me while she wept into my shoulder. Instead, I positioned myself in that lodging chamber and made telephone communications. I responded questions from financial institution investigators. I forwarded correspondence to Natalie. I followed each instruction the fraud department provided me. Each so often, my cellular device would light up with communications from my mother or my sibling. Sometimes I permitted them to proceed to voice recording. Sometimes I listened. My mother's recordings were a rotating pattern of rage, remorse, and desperation. She accused me of betrayal, then pleaded me to think of everything she'd sacrificed, then warned me that I was destroying our household for good. My siblings' recordings were different. She sounded confused, frightened, slightly angry, but primarily lost. She maintained stating things like, "Mother states you're overreacting," that this is simply how households assist each other. She states you're going to ruin her existence. I typed back shorter than I experienced. "No one ruins your existence by questioning for honesty." I wrote, "I never agreed to possess debts established in my identity. That's not household. That's theft." She didn't reply right away. I could experience the tug on her, the identical one that had maintained me chained to this disorder for so extended, loyalty twisted together with fear. On the second evening around midnight, my cellular device signaled again. This occasion it was a number I didn't recognize. When I responded, a male introduced himself as someone from the financial institution's risk and compliance team. He informed me they'd begun reviewing the account my mother had established with my information. He questioned a list of very specific questions about my whereabouts on certain dates, about whether I'd ever signed documents at that branch, whether I'd provided anyone authority of attorney. With each negative response that I provided, I could experience the image forming on his side of the connection. "Gratitude, Miss Donovan," he stated at the conclusion of the communication. "I desire you to comprehend we take this seriously. There will be an internal investigation. You may be contacted by law enforcement. Until this is resolved, your mother will not possess access to the accounts tied to your information." When I terminated, the chamber was quiet, except for the low buzz of the air conditioner. I examined around at the mismatched furniture, the thin curtains, the inexpensive art on the walls. It should have experienced depressing. Instead, it experienced like the safest location I'd been in years. Not because it was pleasant, but because for once, each invoice attached to this chamber possessed my identity on it, and only my identity. No one was concealing behind me. No one was twisting it into a favor I was obligated to them. My mother desired me to return home so I could maintain being her safety net. Instead, I'd landed and severed the net away. I didn't comprehend precisely what the fallout would resemble yet. I simply comprehended that for the initial occasion, whatever occurred subsequently wouldn't be written entirely by her. The fallout didn't occur overnight. It never performs in real existence. It didn't resemble a single dramatic scene where a judge slammed a gavel and my mother was hauled away in restraints. It came in waves, slow and relentless, the manner hospital invoices had once come from my father. At first, the transformations were nearly invisible. The financial institution ceased contacting me and commenced contacting her. Correspondence with my identity on them were corrected. Accounts marked as disputed. Investigations noted on my file. Natalie transmitted me updates explaining in that calm, legal, professional vocal tone what the financial institutions were performing, what the credit bureaus had adjusted, what protections were now in place. Each occasion I secured correspondence confirming that another fraudulent account had been removed from my credit documentation. I experienced lighter, like I was severing off one more burden I'd been dragging behind me for years. The communications from my mother, on the other hand, became louder. She left extended voice recordings about discussing to financial institution investigators, about them questioning questions she didn't desire to respond, about how humiliating it was. She stated things like, "They're treating me like a criminal, Harper, like I represent some variety of scammer. I consistently assisted people. I represent a good individual. You comprehend that." I listened to those recordings precisely once each, and then archived them. For the initial occasion in my existence, I permitted her discomfort remain her problem. My sibling's tone shifted too. At the beginning, she echoed my mother, informing me I was overreacting, that I was making circumstances more difficult than they required to be. But as the weeks proceeded and the payment cards ceased functioning, and the excursions ceased occurring, reality commenced catching up to her too. One evening, about 2 months following, I arrived in Reno. She contacted me instead of simply leaving a recording. I was back in Singapore by then, having completed out the final part of my agreement following a quick excursion to the States to sign some documentation and meet Natalie in person. I nearly permitted the communication to proceed to voice recording, but something made me swipe to respond. "Hey," she stated, and for once, she sounded like the offspring who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, not the social media personality who curated her existence for strangers. "I detected you were in the metropolitan area. You didn't come by." The remorse attempted to flare, but I maintained it in check. I'd proceeded to Reno for 3 days. In those 3 days, I'd positioned myself in a small office with Natalie, signed affidavits, provided a statement to a detective who barely appeared old enough to rent a vehicle, and walked past the residence I grew up in without proceeding inside. I'd viewed my mother's vehicle in the driveway, viewed the curtains move like someone was observing from behind them. I'd maintained walking. "I comprehend," I stated. I was there for meetings. I could detect her respiring on the connection, searching for statements. "Mother states you're attempting to secure her arrested," she blurted out. "Mother states you reported her, and now the financial institutions are pursuing her for fraud. Is that accurate?" I took a deep breath. "I reported accounts that were established in my identity without my permission," I stated. "The financial institutions decided what to perform with that information. Your mother." She corrected without thinking, then winced. "Our mother." I detected the slip and permitted it hang there for a moment. I didn't correct her. I informed her what I hadn't informed my mother. I informed her about the correspondence from the financial institution, the accounts I never established, the manner my mother acknowledged signing my identity without questioning me. I informed her about the years of transfers and the debt that never actually diminished. She went quiet, in a manner that informed me she'd comprehended pieces of this all along, but had never permitted herself connect them. I thought she possessed it under control. She stated ultimately, her vocal tone small. She consistently stated she'd satisfy it back. She consistently stated you comprehended. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the wall. "That's the thing about falsehoods," I stated. "They sound a lot like the truth when you detect them enough occasions." Following that, the news came in bits. A message from my sibling stating the residence had officially proceeded into foreclosure. Correspondence from Natalie explaining that my mother had agreed to some variety of plea agreement for the fraud charges the financial institution pursued. No incarceration duration, but probation, mandatory counseling for gambling addiction, and restitution installments that would follow her for years. A voice recording from my mother, one of the final I listened to, in which she swung between blaming me and blaming the financial institution, and then very briefly blaming herself. I never detected her state the statements I stole from you. What she stated instead was, I simply borrowed. I thought I'd repair it. It sounded nearly more difficult. While all of that was unfolding in Nevada, my existence was quietly rearranging itself. I completed my final agreement in Singapore and turned down the renewal. The compensation was good, but I was done constructing an existence around other people's emergencies, both at duties and at home. I requested for critical care positions back in the States, carefully selecting metropolitan areas where I possessed no household within traveling distance. I landed employment at a medical facility in Portland, a location with mountains instead of neon, where the only illuminations at evening came from residences and street lamps, not gambling facilities attempting to lure you inside. The day I signed the lease on a small apartment there, entirely in my own identity, with my income and my cleaned-up credit documentation, I positioned myself in my vehicle and wept. Not the difficult, unpleasant weeping of panic or grief, simply a quiet, shaking variety of release. I was 34 years old and it experienced like I was ultimately securing my initial genuine home. Liam moved several months later, taking a position with a financial institution in the identical metropolitan area. He never made a significant situation about it, simply maintained stating he was prepared for a different pace, and that the mountains were superior for his running. We didn't construct some instant fairy tale existence together. We both performed extended periods. We both carried our own scars. But we constructed routines that were ours, not constructed around repairing someone else's chaos. Meals on Sundays following evening periods. Walks around the neighborhood when our consciousness were too full of other people's emergencies. Therapy appointments we didn't cancel because we were too occupied. In therapy, I commenced untangling the disorder of loyalty and obligation and love that had maintained me wired to my mother for so extended. I discussed being the offspring who translated invoices and medical professionals' notes for her, about carrying adult worries in an offspring's body. I discussed how she could be warm and humorous and generous, and then converted sharp and cruel the second anyone questioned her selections. My therapist provided it identities I'd never permitted myself utilize: parentification, financial abuse, emotional manipulation. None of those terms transformed what had already occurred, but they made sense of why it had experienced the manner it performed. Identifying circumstances made them simpler to position down. My mother attempted contacting several more occasions in those early months. Eventually, instead of permitting it proceed to voice recording, I responded one of them. I was positioning myself on the floor of my half-unpacked living chamber, surrounded by containers and the scent of fresh paint. She didn't commence with hello. She commenced with they took the residence. Are you happy now? My chest tightened, but my vocal tone remained steady. No, I stated. Losing the residence doesn't make me happy. It makes me sad that it came to this. But I'm not the one who gambled it away. She launched into the familiar pattern, blaming the gambling establishment, the financial institution, the economy, a problematic streak of fortune. I permitted her communicate until she operated out of breath. When she ultimately went quiet, I stated what I'd rehearsed in my consciousness for weeks. I'm not transmitting you any more funds, Mother. I'm not co-signing anything. I'm not permitting you utilize my credit or my identity ever again. I hope you take the counseling seriously. I hope you become superior, but I'm done rescuing you. There was an extended pause. For a second, I thought the connection had gone terminated. When she ultimately spoke, her vocal tone was smaller than I'd ever detected it. So that's it, she stated, following everything I've performed for you. I thought of the meals she packed when I was small, the manner she cheered at my educational institution plays, the manner she held me when my father expired. Then I thought of the signatures forged in my identity, the sleepless evenings, the manner she'd positioned me up at the terminal to proceed consumed by a swimming pool. Both versions of her were genuine. The mistake I'd made for years was accepting that the loving components canceled out the harm. They didn't. They simply made it more confusing. I'm grateful for the good circumstances, I stated. I genuinely am. But they don't erase the destruction. I cannot maintain pretending they perform." She didn't respond to that. She simply wept quietly for a moment, then terminated. That was the final occasion we possessed a genuine conversation. We still exist in each other's existences in small, distant manners. Holiday messages that are more routine than sentiment. Updates passed along through my sibling, who has slowly constructed a genuine existence for herself, performing cosmetics for weddings and performing double periods at a dining establishment when she requires to. She apologized to me in a shaky vocal tone one evening over video communication, stating she'd comprehended something was incorrect, but had been too frightened to question the individual who financed for everything. I informed her I comprehended, because I performed. For an extended duration, that individual had been me. The circumstance about ultimately stepping out of a role you were never intended to perform is that the planet doesn't conclude when you position it down. The invoices still come. The consequences still land. People complain and sulk and accuse you of not caring, and then slowly they adjust, or they don't. But either manner, you cease existing on a loop of panic and remorse. One evening, about a year following that evening at the terminal, I was positioning myself at my cooking surface in Portland, with my portable computer open. My financial institution account balance positioned in front of me, solid and boring in the best manner. My compensation from the medical facility had come in, and for the initial occasion in as extended as I could recall, there was no automatic transfer scheduled to depart as soon as it arrived. The funds simply remained mine. I could experience the old instinct tug at me, that urge to transmit a piece of it back home simply in case. Instead, I moved a portion into reserves, and another into a small travel fund with my identity on it, and no one else's. When I closed the portable computer, Liam walked in from a run, flushed and respiring difficult. "How does it experience?" he questioned, nodding toward the computer. I thought about the terminal, about the communication to the financial institution, about the lodging chamber and the folder of evidence, and the courtroom where I positioned myself in the back, while my mother took a plea. I thought about the quiet evenings in my own apartment, the patients I still couldn't preserve, the ones I performed, the fact that my exhaustion now came from duties I selected instead of from debts I didn't make. "It experiences like mine," I stated. "For the initial occasion, it experiences like my existence is actually mine." That was the genuine conclusion, more than any court document or foreclosure notice. Not my mother losing her residence or being forced into counseling. Not my sibling taking late evening periods to satisfy her own invoices. The satisfying component was standing in my own cooking area in a metropolitan area my mother had never viewed, comprehending that each invoice with my identity on it was one I'd selected, and one I could satisfy or not satisfy on my own terms. The revenge wasn't simply in what she lost. It was in what I ultimately took back. I used to think revenge intended performing something significant and dramatic to cause pain to the individual who caused you pain, standing them up, exposing them in public, ruining their reputation. That evening at the terminal in Reno, when I informed the financial institution to deactivate everything and listen to my mother panic on the cellular device, it experienced like revenge in that classic manner. I'm not going to pretend that didn't experience good. It performed. There was a deep, sharp satisfaction in ultimately stating negative, in observing the consequences strike the individual who'd been loading them onto my back for a decade. But as duration proceeded, I comprehended the genuine revenge wasn't what occurred to her. It was what ultimately occurred for me. I allocated a lot of therapy sessions attempting to untangle why it required me so extended to view what was occurring. I possessed all the signs right in front of me. Secretive behavior, never viewing the actual statements, the debt never proceeding down despite the absurd amounts I transmitted, my identity manifesting on accounts I didn't establish. If I'd detected this narrative from a patient's household member, I'd have viewed it immediately. Financial abuse, identity theft, emotional manipulation. But when it represents your own mother, all those labels experience too harsh at first. You don't desire to attach statements like abuse to someone who packed your meals and held your hand at your father's funeral. So you come up with softer explanations. She's overwhelmed. She's confused. She doesn't comprehend how financial institutions function. She's simply unlucky. You convince yourself that repeating those excuses is loyalty. Genuinely, it's self-protection. Because once you acknowledge that someone you love is capable of treating you like a resource instead of an individual, you cannot unsee it. If you're listening to this and some component of it experiences uncomfortably familiar, I desire you to detect this clearly. When someone in your household constantly questions for funds, fabricates about why they require it, conceals the genuine numbers, or makes you experience guilty for even questioning questions, that's not normal. When you experience sick accessing your financial application, when you're frightened to mention your own invoices because you comprehend they'll state theirs are more important, that's not normal. When someone utilizes your social security identification or your identity without your clear permission and then informs you it's simply documentation, that's not love. That's theft. I don't care if they represent a parent, a sibling, a partner, or a grandparent. The title doesn't erase the behavior. Financial abuse doesn't consistently resemble somebody taking your wallet. Sometimes it resembles a parent deciding that your future is collateral for their problematic selections. Sometimes it sounds like if you don't assist, we'll be without shelter. Sometimes it sounds like following everything I've performed for you. You are obligated to me. It nearly consistently comes with a side of remorse. That's how it functions. They teach you to experience selfish, for desiring an existence that doesn't revolve around preserving them. One of the most difficult circumstances I had to learn was that establishing financial boundaries with my mother didn't make me a problematic offspring. It made me a responsible adult. For years, I thought being a good offspring intended never permitting her strike rock bottom. The truth is, my constant rescuing was precisely what maintained her from ever facing the reality she'd created. She didn't have to proceed to counseling because she could contact me. She didn't have to sever up her payment cards because she comprehended I'd transmit another transfer. She didn't have to inform my sibling negative because I was there in the background filling the gap. When I ultimately stepped back, everything I'd been supporting up crashed. It was disorderly. It was unpleasant. It caused pain to people, including me. But it also forced everyone involved to cease pretending. My mother had to position herself in front of a counselor and communicate about her gambling, not simply designate it problematic fortune. She had to stand in a courtroom and detect the statement fraud attached to her identity, not simply shrug and blame the financial institution. My sibling had to learn what most adults learn much earlier, that pleasant circumstances cost funds, and that funds has to come from somewhere genuine. Does that repair everything? No. My mother is still who she is. Perhaps she'll transform. Perhaps she won't. My sibling and I are closer now, but there's still a scar between us where all those years of silence and half-truths used to position themselves. This isn't a fairy tale. It's simply superior than the nightmare I was in before. The component I possess the most control over now is myself. I accessed my credit. I froze it when I required to. And I observe it regularly. I don't share my social security identification freely. I don't co-sign loans. I read each line of any document that possesses my identity on it, even if someone rolls their eyes and designates me paranoid. I communicate about what occurred instead of concealing it like some shameful secret. Because secrets are where this variety of circumstance expands. If you're in the United States, and you view yourself in my mother more than in me, if you experience a twitch in your abdomen when you detect the statement gambling, because you comprehend you're one problematic evening away from requiring someone to rescue you out again, there are individuals whose entire occupation is to assist with that. There are helplines and counselors and groups for problem gambling. You don't have to wait until your offspring freezes your accounts, and you're standing at a checkout line with a declined payment card and a fraud investigator on the cellular device. Question for assistance before you drag someone else down with you. And if you view yourself in me, the offspring or partner or sibling who has become the unpaid accountant and emergency fund for your entire household, here's what I wish someone had informed me a decade ago. You're permitted to question for proof. You're permitted to view the statements. You're permitted to state, I'll assist you this one occasion, but I require to view a plan for how this isn't going to occur again. You're permitted to state, no, I cannot perform that, even if they designate you selfish. You're permitted to protect your credit, your reserves, your future. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you careful. It might experience cruel in the moment because you've been trained to equate love with sacrifice. But love without any boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. You disappear so everyone else can remain comfortable. That's not why you were born. One of the most powerful circumstances I performed during this entire disorder was communicate to a therapist. I comprehend therapy isn't available or affordable for everyone, but if you can locate a manner to communicate to a professional or even a trusted friend about what's occurring, perform it. Not someone who's going to state, well, that's simply how household is, but someone who will state, that's not acceptable, and you deserve superior. When you state this out loud, when you lay out the numbers and the falsehoods and the late evening communications, it becomes more difficult to minimize it. It becomes genuine in a manner your consciousness cannot force into a dark section anymore. If you're frightened of what might occur if you cease satisfying, I comprehend it. I was terrified. I imagined my mother without shelter under a bridge, my sibling blaming me indefinitely, my extended household severing me off. None of that occurred. What performed occur was foreclosure notices, court dates, counseling sessions, and a lot of angry telephone communications. What also occurred was that I ultimately possessed enough energy and funds to construct an existence that didn't revolve around someone else's addiction. I moved, I saved, I rested. I laughed without checking my cellular device each 5 minutes to ensure no one was in crisis. I commenced to recall what it experienced like to possess interests. I learned that I preferred hiking more than gambling establishments, and that quiet mornings with roasted beans and silence can experience like luxury when you're accustomed to constant emergency. People love to state that blood is thicker than water. They utilize it to excuse nearly anything. But here's what I comprehend now. Household isn't the individuals who share your genetic material. Household is the individuals who don't convert you into collateral. The individuals who don't punish you for possessing boundaries. The individuals who view you as an individual, not a compensation. In the conclusion, my mother performed face consequences. She lost her residence. She had to position herself in chambers and communicate about her gambling. She had to exist with a record that will follow her for an extended duration. There's a component of me that still experiences sad about that. She's my mother. I wish she'd selected differently. I wish she'd questioned for assistance before stealing from me, before standing me up at the terminal to proceed consume by a swimming pool. But the component of me that remained in that lodging chamber and made those communications doesn't regret what I performed. That component of me is the reason I'm not still stuck in the identical loop. If you've been taken for granted by your own household, I'm not here to inform you to burn each bridge. I'm here to inform you that you're permitted to walk off the bridge they maintain constructing on your back. You're permitted to state, I will not fund this anymore. You're permitted to select peace over constant panic. You're permitted to construct an existence where your difficult duties finance for your dreams, not someone else's addiction. That was my revenge narrative. Not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, steady reclaiming of everything I'd provided away without comprehending it. Funds, duration, rest, self-respect. If you view yourself anywhere in this, I hope you take at least one small step to protect yourself. Access your credit documentation, question a difficult question, communicate to someone, establish one boundary, and maintain it. It might experience like the conclusion of the planet at first. It's not. It might be the beginning of securing your own existence back. And despite everything, I can inform you this with a straight face. That sensation is worth everything.